Najan, hello. I'm Ann Brusky, Deputy Director of the John Michael Kohler Arts Center, and I want to welcome you all to Day 2 of the Cloth is Land Symposium. We begin with the land acknowledgement. The John Michael Kohler Arts Center acknowledges that we live in Sheboygan County, occupy the traditional homelands of the Ho-Chunk, Potawatomi, Menominee, Oneida, Ojibwe people, along with the southwest shores of Michigami. This area holds tremendous value to these tribes and their cultural history. Let this acknowledgement remind all that this land was taken from the Native people. Let these words increase public awareness as we honor, respect, and support the indigenous peoples who are still connected to the land on which we live. First, thank you to everyone who has been involved with the symposium. It has been really wonderful. And just want to note yesterday a few remarks. Appreciate the artist panel in which we learned about the curation and the artist's work in the exhibitions and topics about making with hands, indigeneity, identity, connectivity to land and to each other, and healing. And then the Collecting and Caring for Hmong Art panel brought forward many inquiries. When collecting, what is your purpose? How do we steward, care, and be in service to the work and our community? And thinking about the big I's, institutions and their roles. And then the afternoon featured artist-led workshops, including one that I want to make a special note about, the Coins of Positivity. That is an ongoing workshop. So if you did not partake, please partake. It's still ongoing, and you can go in the social studio, which is the room to your left when you come into the Art Center, and that's where that's happening. So please know that that's still happening, and you can check it out. So yesterday I made a few remarks and about Cloth is Land exhibition and insights into the importance of this symposium, especially for the Arts Center, to deepen relationships, listen to community, reflect, appreciate, and respond as we ask questions and have candid conversations. And we look forward to today's discourse again and want to give thanks to Pachia, the artists, the organizations involved, the panelists, community, you being here, funders, and partners involved, including the Payne Arts Center and Gardens and WACMA, Wisconsin United Coalition of Mutual Assistance Association. And on to our first panel. It's my pleasure to give an intro for Aileen Lowe. Aileen Lowe is a scholar of American refugee literature and critical Hmong American studies. She currently holds the position of Assistant Professor of Asian American Literature at Colorado College. She has published writings on authors such as Edwidge Denticott, Ariel Dorfman, and Cao Kalia-Yaten, and on the film Nia Shia Zhan and The Betrayal. Her work can be found in American Studies Journal, Literature Interpretation Theory, and Autobiography Studies, as well as the edited volumes Claiming Place on the Agency of Hmong Women, The Humanities in a World Upside Down, and most recently, the Routledge Handbook of Refugee Narratives. Aileen will be coming to the stage and introduce each of the panelists for you. So let's give a warm welcome to Aileen Lowe.
Good morning. Sorry, I have so much stuff. I just want to echo Anne's thanks to everyone for organizing, particularly to Bachia, Dua, and Zong, and Tanya, who I just met this morning. I will briefly do introductions for folks, and they will all each come out. And then, as yesterday, we have a set of questions that we'd like folks to ask or to answer. And then just to give you a sense of this particular panel, we're thinking about curatorial practices and It's meant to provide insights into curation as knowledge making and what it means for Hmong women to curate Hmong exhibitions that disrupt ways Hmong people have been exoticized in the past. So first, I want to introduce Kayeng Ya, who's the president of Red Green Rivers and Kayeng Plus community, and has over 2 decades of unwavering commitment to social justice advocacy. Her career spans leadership roles in community organizing, policy engagement, and development efforts worldwide, including being a recipient of the 2019 Bush Foundation Fellowship, and in 2022 being appointed to President Biden's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. To better contextualize her for today's panel, though, I want to add that Red Green Rivers is a social enterprise collaborating with artisans in the Mekong region of Southeast Asia. Together, they engage in co-design, production, and direct purchasing. And RGR distinguishes itself by refraining from mass production, prioritizing quality and authenticity. The enterprise firmly believes that nurturing artistic talents rooted in traditional indigenous designs fosters the development of sustainable communities. So please help me in welcoming Kayeng. Our next 2 presenters will be sort of speaking together, but I will still introduce them separately. Chong Moi was born in Laos but grew up in California. She is a professor of Hmong Studies and History at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. Currently, she has 2 co-curated exhibits at the Payne Art Center and Gardens, Mao Lor, A Journey Through Hmong Paj and Suitcase from Nia Kompityo. And I saw this yesterday. It was beautiful. So please, again, help me in welcoming Chong to the stage. And Chua Tyo Pi-Xiong is a Hmong refugee who grew up in the Fox Valley in Wisconsin. She is an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, where she teaches courses on education and Hmong studies theory and research. Again, her most recent curation is the Suitcase from Nia Kompityo exhibition at the Payne Art Center and Gardens. So again, please welcome Tyo to the stage. And finally, our last panelist is someone who you probably already know, but it's Bachia Lucy Va, is a textile artist and design educator whose work is informed by pluriversal imagination centering Pando, Hmong knowledge, and indigenous diasporic perspectives. Her curatorial practice focuses on crafting educational experiences within and beyond the gallery, extending into community spaces, colleges, and universities, along with art institutions. Van currently teaches at the University of California, Davis, and is the founder of Culture Through Cloth, a studio providing Pando workshops and programming to the public. She is a second-generation Hmong American who has lived and traveled throughout the Hmong diaspora in Asia. In 2017, she curated her first solo show, One Cloth, Many Threads, The Diversity of Hmong Textiles in Luang Prabang, Laos, with the Traditional Arts and Ethnology Center. Her recent curatorial projects include Cloth as Community, Threading the Needle of the Past, Present, and Future with Sacramento State University, alongside Cloth as Land, Hmong Indigeneity with the John Michael Kohler Arts Center. So please welcome Bachia to the stage. So we do have images of the different exhibits that these panelists have put together. So as we go through, maybe I'll just leave the clicker around here and you can find the appropriate image. I would like to open with a fairly broad question, right? Which is just if you could say a little bit about what you brought into the role of curator, whether that is being Hmong, an artist, a scholar, a woman, what was the inspiration behind your work, and what or who did you want to prioritize in putting these exhibits together? And as I pose questions, we don't need to necessarily go in any kind of order, and particularly if you feel like you have something that you must say, right? I invite you to go ahead and go first.
I can go first. We were joking that there's wisdom and then there's beauty here, so I feel like I'm the wisdom here. I had the honor and pleasure of co-curating an exhibit in Minnesota called Matriarchal Legacies, Textiles from the Textile Trails, with Guy Oscar Lee, who is in the audience. And I think that really helped me understand what curating is about. And then she and Machia invited me to join them in the Cloth Origins here. And that's my entree into this space here. And I'm extremely honored and grateful for inviting me, because I'm not usually in this kind of space. So I really appreciate that, learning from artists and being a part of the Kohler Center, who has had a long history with our community. So I want to first just kind of set the context there. I am one of the founders of Red Green Rivers, and Red Green Rivers is about women, and so the sustainability of our Hmong diaspora in Southeast Asia, but particularly from a women's lens. And the premise of Red Green Rivers is that when women's condition are good, their community will be sustainable, right? And so we all know this as mothers and sisters and grandmas and auntie, that if we're doing well, our community and our family will do well. So that's the perspective that I bring to the table here. And when I founded Red Green Rivers, I actually had just lived in Laos and Thailand for nearly 10 years, and I started a women's organization in Laos. And I saw the ingenuity, the creation, the creativity of women there. And I also saw that almost everyone knew how to sew, with the exception of young girls who lived in urban areas. And so when we think about employment and income generating projects, I quickly said, well, you already have a skill. Why don't we just utilize that skill to generate income for yourselves? And so when I came back to this country in 2014, I then asked my two colleagues to say, let's start this business together. And we call it Red Green Rivers because, for those of you who are in the audience who are Hmong, but many Hmong people don't know this either, is that these are the two actual rivers that border southern part of China going into Vietnam. And 200 some years ago, our ancestors from China crossed those two rivers to come to Southeast Asia. And that's where all of us have that shared experience of living in the countries of Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. And so it's really to pay homage to that, but also to really pay homage to the women and maternal ancestors that we have. And so I feel that that's what I and Red Green Rivers is always bringing to the table, is the voices of women, but that sense of sisterhood, global sisterhood that we have across the world, and that unfortunately our stories are not told very much, and it's always shadowed by the secret war from our fathers who fought in the war, but there's never enough stories about the women who kept the society together during those tragic periods. And so a lot of my work is in social justice and in policy, and so I've been blending the arts and textiles with that journey of the Hmong who have survived through conflicts, right? So I'll leave it at that for now, but it's really from a women's perspective, feminist perspective, but that globalization and what role we play as Hmong Americans in ensuring that that globalization includes us, right? And that we have to claim some of that back.
So we aren't going in order, but I will go next. The thing I will say about the suitcase from Nia, which is the Kong Pitua, this is the second iteration of this version of that exhibit, and this comes from a larger exhibit called La Jade in Wisconsin, which has been sort of a community-based, volunteer-based exhibit from a lot of community members. And there are scholars in there, but there are also other sort of creatives and other folks who have different experiences who have been part of the team for, gosh, is it 5 years now? I don't know. But all the years have blended together. And I think you and I wanted to maybe do this iteration of it for the Payne Art Center and Gardens, is also to bring that into a space like the Payne just because I think it is important to occupy space when we are invited to occupy space and take up as much space as possible. And so this is the mini exhibit that complements the larger Mao Lor journey through Bandao at the Paint Art Center and Gardens. And I think our intention for that really was to reshift the conversation of how we think about Hmong weddings, because when we talk about Hmong weddings, we're talking about the bride price, or we're talking about the Leta Hao, and we don't really talk about the other aspects of Hmong wedding. And a Hmong wedding is a series of days and a series of conversations and a series of rituals that happen, right? And so we wanted to focus more on the women, the bride, not only the bride, but who sort of has been part of the bride's life to get her to that point, and what is it that she is given on the day, right, that marks a transition in her life. And oftentimes when people have weddings and they ask about what happens at the wedding, it's usually they ask about the Leta Hao and they don't ask about anything else, and that frames women in a certain way, and that frames the weddings in a certain way. And we want to say, no, there are other things that happen. There are other exchanges that happen. There are other signs of love and care, right, that happens. And a lot of it is the kompikyo, right, is that dowry. We said we framed it in the suitcase, but it comes in all kinds of forms, right? And we just thought that suitcase was such a beautiful metaphor to talk about what happens in that exchange. And so all of the things that we exhibited are things from our suitcases, our kompikyo, and there were things that once the show is over, we are taking back home back into our houses. And there's a rice cooker that that is on display, and that means I'm not cooking rice in that rice cooker anymore. I also brought like plates and bowls and forks and spoons, right, as part of the things that my mom gave me. And so that means we have less plates and less bowls, right, in our house to use now. So that means there may be more discussions in my household about who's doing the dishes, because we have less dishes to use. And so I thought that aspect, right, of showing Hmong weddings and showing Hmong everyday items is worthy of being shown, because this is part of Hmong life too, and especially when we're talking about women and the transitions that they have to make. And so I'll leave it there and have you all add other things.
Yeah, so thank you for this question in terms of thinking about sort of our role in curating. I think this word curator is sort of new in some ways, that to come into this kind of world to claim or even say that I'm a curator is quite new, because I think for myself and the things I do in life is that I'm just a Hmong kid who gets to live a Hmong dream, right? And compared to sort of the Hmong dream that perhaps my parents or grandparents have lived is very different, and I get to live a different kind of Hmong dream, right? And in that sort of, what does it mean to kind of curate from that perspective, particularly one that thinks about being a daughter, being a woman, being a mother, right? And the things that we get to inherit, the things that perhaps we didn't want, but now we have to grapple with or think about. I think that influences the ways that I think about what happens in our everyday, right? What does it mean for us to live and to go through sort of the motion of living, right? And so I think I bring that into sort of this lens of, well, in the showing of objects or in the showing of stories, right? How does that play out? And what that might look like if we put a mundane item and we call it like something different, right? And what does that offer to sort of, different institutions or different places or the people who are attending and consuming? How does that actually, break some of the common ideas that, Hmong people is just sort of this exotic, like if you get to know like a cloth, right, then you get to know Hmong people. But do you? Because if you don't actually know the depth, you don't actually know more about that, what does that mean, right? And I think, for me, I'm always trying, like we talked about this a lot, like how do we create chaos? Although, sometimes the things that we present actually are pretty simple and neat, but it's not as chaotic as I wish it would be. But I think, in terms of thinking about when we put things into a place like a museum or art center, what are, some of the issues that we're grappling with, and how might we break away from sort of these traditional modes of thinking about Hmong people as victims, or focusing on sort of, we get to celebrate Hmong people because they help us in the secret war, right? And how, perhaps that's not really the story that we need to talk about. How do we, understand that story and the complexity, but how do we put it on the viewers to do that work themselves, right? And so I think we're kind of in a moment where I get to live that dream, where I don't necessarily need to tell that context anymore. And I'm really grateful to be able to do that. And so, as I think about what I bring, or what is this role of being a curator, I also try to process that, like, what privilege does that mean for me that I get to live in that kind of role?
Yeah, I resonate with a lot of that. I think, for me, growing up as a second-generation Hmong American, I was born and raised in Sacramento, California. And so I felt really disconnected from understanding my Hmong identity. And that might itself be a narrative that's constantly repeated as well, but it rings very true if I am to go back to what really led me down this path of curating, because in many ways, growing up, I think studying anthropology, for example, gave me a way to understand culture and, in a sense, understand myself and who I was and who my people were. And at some point, you break from that, right? Because you can only learn so much through the books that other people have written about you. But there's sort of a generational gap to where I didn't know how to communicate with my grandparents. And so I did look to these spaces. I did look to exhibition spaces, to, written narratives to understand who I was. And I've always been really inspired by, these concepts and ideas that I was learning about myself, essentially. And so that's kind of my start. I've always been really interested in museums. I never really saw myself as a curator at all, really, until I took on the Clothes Land project. And I started working with the curatorial team. And, I started questioning, I guess I am a curator. I've curated quite a few shows, actually, but I've never intended to be a curator. I've worked in museum spaces simply because I studied. I went to college. I studied anthropology. So essentially, or just naturally, I was working in collections or in archives. I was reading about artifacts and different things like that. And I became, really interested in Bandao. And my curatorial projects, all of them really have centered on Bandao and flower cloth because, I've always been interested in fashion just growing up. And I think I, as a Hmong American kid, never liked Hmong fashion, never liked Bandao. And then when I went to college, I met a shaman who had just revealed so many different things about it to me. The way that it represents different regions and the way that we wear it and the meaning behind the colors and the symbols and how it connects to this spiritual world. And I was just really fascinated because I was always interested in mythology. And here was this whole magical world behind all of these things that growing up I had no idea. And I think if I had known that to some degree, I would have appreciated it more. Maybe I wasn't listening. Maybe I didn't hear the stories, but I never felt like these things were told to me. And so when I had discovered it, I was just floored. And I made it a life mission to keep understanding what all this stuff was. And I, somehow then just continued down that route in different capacities. So some of the first displays that I curated was with the Hmong Story 40 project. That was a community project, a community-based and really grassroots-based exhibition project that took place in 2015. It was a team of, different professionals, Hmong professionals throughout California that just came together and said, hey, we're all gonna put $1,000 in and we have $40,000, so now we can build an exhibition. And so that was a really phenomenal experience. There's lots of critiques about the types of narratives that were captured because they were really much about the war, really much about white folks that came in to save the Hmong people in many ways, But at the same time, it was really a great step in a direction for me and for the community, because it allowed us to celebrate. Hmong Story 40 celebrated the 40th year that the Hmong were here in the US. And I think that project I have seen go on to inspire a lot of other projects in other communities, like in the Lao community and the Cambodian communities in California. And so that was my start. It was really a grassroots project where we were, getting into the community, interviewing people, asking them for their items if they would be willing to share it with us, showing it at a school, in the cafeteria, doing it at Hmong New Year's. And so that was really fun. And then I went to Laos, and I got to work with the Traditional Arts and Ethnology Center there. And just with what I had done with Hmong Story 40, they had suggested maybe I put together a pop-up exhibition. So I put together a small pop-up exhibition with a few items from their collection on Hmong textiles, talking about the diversity. And then I went on to create the Cloth is Community show. So this happened right alongside the Cloth is Land show. It opened in February 2023 for a month at Sacramento State University in the library. And this was another really great community effort as well, where we worked with community members to showcase traditional outfits. We worked with community members to make videos on how to wear the traditional outfits. We worked with a graphic illustrator in Minnesota, Alex Yang, to create this map. And then we showcased different hats that represented different regions, including some items from my own personal collection along with my mom. And so then, moving onto Cloth is Land, that was a really different experience for me, I think, because I had been working, with curating educational exhibitions that were talking about, like, what is cloth? What is this? What is that? But, with Cloth is Land, it really challenged me in many ways to move beyond that and to think more conceptually about how we can talk about clothing and textiles, and not only think conceptually about that, but really much work in tandem with other artists and how they're thinking about it. And so I had to really shift my thinking in, how do I take this idea that I had, but also very much open it up and give it to other people to work with and hear and listen to what they're saying as well. So that's kind of.
Thank you. This next question is about audience, and I was really thinking about this too as I was hearing the two panels yesterday. I think something that Ka Osprey said is what does it mean for our work to occupy space when we are not in that space? And then as I was hearing the artists talk yesterday morning too, I kept thinking about what the really close relationship that curators should ideally have with the artists whose work they're displaying, and like they're telling kind of a story together, particularly here where it's a show that includes lots of different artists. And I'm reminded of something Elisa said yesterday too about the primacy of the object and how in many ways we want to move away from that. And I feel like all of you are saying that in your own intentions behind your curatorial practices is, yes, featuring the object, but also trying to tell a deeper story, right? And so I'm curious about who you have in mind as your audience when you are curating these shows. How is the show curated to welcome that audience, to engage them? Because you are in this public space where lots of different types of people move through. And so the conversation, you kind of lose control of it in some ways, right?
Yeah, I feel like it seems like a simple answer, but after curating a few of these exhibits and I was kind of taking a dig at myself because I'm older now, and I feel the responsibility to be wiser in our community. I'm really an elder, but I feel super not wise. And since I've been curating and working with Red Green Rivers, I've had the privilege of working with older women or even younger women who know more about textile and Hmong embroidery and applique and so forth. And I've learned a great deal because I have I just came to my realization that maybe I've been running away from that because I didn't want to be pigeonholed as a woman who sews, who produces women, children, and that was it. I was chasing the American dream where I wanted to have a career in independence, and I didn't pay attention to all that, even though they were present constantly in my life. I am the 1.5 generation where I came to this country. I was 7 years old. I was really the interpreter for my family and my community. I lived in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and my cousins came later on and they didn't speak English as well, so I was always that cultural navigator for them. So I knew a lot about Hmong culture because I'm always listening, and as a young woman, you listen more than you speak, right? So I was always in the presence of wiser women and men, and so I did know a lot of these things. But I think what I also learned through through this process, and I want to give the caveat that we are Hmong Lengma, right? I am Green Hmong, and so our dialect and our clothing is different from Hmong Tlau, right? White Hmong. These are two main dialects here. And as I started traveling to other countries like Vietnam and China, they have their own styles and language, but also artwork. And so I began to appreciate and understand the complexity, but the expansive richness of our heritage. And I was kind of sad to, when I started doing this exhibit, that so many Hmong people didn't know what hemp is or batik, even though we wore those clothes constantly, right? And that during funeral rites and with the deceased, we should gift hemp cloth. And so my audience is really the Hmong American community, right? To appreciate the diversity that we have in our own community. And then we open it up to like the art center here. And I have to say, more of the older white folks who loves weaving and so forth, they knew more about hemp and weaving than our Hmong people, young Hmong people did. So it really just challenged me about who the audience is. And I'm looking at Keely because she has a loom at her house, and I made her take me to her house to look at her loom to see how different it is from the Hmong strap loom, right? So it surprised me a lot about how little we know about our own culture and history because we were, constantly on the move. But it also means that there's an audience for us, and we have the right to be in these kinds of spaces so that we can exchange some of that. And I think it's, I'm always pushing policymakers and also institutional leaders to say it is your responsibility to also make sure that we're in those spaces, right? Because you have more resources than us. You have this history of collection and museum exhibits. And yesterday I was really inspired by that conversation about why do we collect. And I think that the reason why I first started as a hoarder. I have many suitcases of things I've collected over the years, and I love being curated because now I'm taking those things out and showing it to you guys, right? Because I have a love for Pandao and for my own inheritance, right? Heirlooms that my families have given me. And in fact, when my grandma was getting very old, I said to my mom and dad, I don't want anything, but I want her clothes, right? And so when she did pass away, she's a master shaman. They gave me that, and I dry cleaned it, and I asked my auntie to sew it back up, right? So I feel like it's a very powerful Hmong skirt in my household that I own, and that it's my heritage, right? And so things like that really makes me proud to be a Hmong person and a Hmong woman. But now I have the obligation and responsibility to share that with everybody else as well too, And so I think I'm not a curator. I even said, but yeah, I can't be on that panel because I'm not a curator. I'm going to embarrass myself. But after learning more and more about museum work and being in the presence of Ga and Bachi and others, I am starting to realize that it's really important for us to be curators so that we can tell the stories. Because even with Ga and others, I said, no, but I don't want it that way because that's not the process of making hemp. It has to start from the threads, right, to the weaving and to, there's many processes. And so I think being that bridge to the audience is really important and making sure that it's as authentic as possible, right? And so I think those are some of the things that have been kind of circulating in my head to say, what is my legacy, in this realm? And when I say mine, not just mine, but my generation of legacy, what is it that we want to tell other generations of Hmong Americans, but the broader community about us, and not just through the war, but through the expansive and rich heritage that we bring, not only to America, but to the world, right? And so I know I feel very burdened by this, but it's also a sense of responsibility, and I take joy in trying to figure out how to do it, and I'm so happy to be in partnership with so many creative people.
Okay, so we're still not going in order, but I will go next as well. Coming into being a curator is also an accidental thing, like so many things, which I think is such a Hmong sentiment, so I will sort of embrace it. When I think about audience, I think it really is, I'm still the audience that I want to curate for and make stories for. And if curating is just a fancy title to say that you're a storyteller, then I will also embrace that as well. And so what does it mean to center myself all the time, which I think is an interesting question for Hmong women, right, to be in a public space and center themselves. And what does it mean for someone who is still, I think, young presenting, right, in the world as well? And what are those conversations that you need to have with yourself, and how much do you reveal, right, about yourself and your community? And something that I think about a lot is, what Ma Bang says, that not everything needs to be said. And I think that was something I thought about a lot with the two exhibits that happened at the Pain, and that was the conversations that I had with Zhao, who co-curated the Mao Lor, A Journey Through Hmoob Paj Ntaub, and then Yuan I also had these conversations about how much do we say about these objects, because you could say so many things about these objects. What is enough? And what do we translate and what do we not translate, right? Because we also did the Hmong text and then also the English text as well for both of these exhibits. And so, it's, I think it's just sort of like grappling with the comfort level of being the thing that you want to see, but then also being the storyteller that has to tell your own story as well. And realizing that the medium of exhibits is really kind of a static kind of a medium, right? Because you put it out there. Yes, there is some text. People can read it or not. I think a lot of people don't read it, which I think is also okay too, because they're allowed to have their own interaction and their own narrative with the objects that are shown. And so, maybe we don't need to say that much. And maybe some people do want more and some people do want less, but I think that's the moment, that's the thing that we want to spark, right? Is whatever conversation they want to have or engagement. Maybe it begins with familiarity. Maybe it begins with a feeling of discomfort or exclusion, or maybe it's, if they just said this is a gold chain, then you're like, what, right? Like, what else, right? Like, I want to know more. Like, where did it come from? Who does it belong to? How many carats is it, right? Maybe how much it was. And all those things, I hope, sort of spark other adventures if that person who is engaging with that object wants to go on. And if they don't, that's okay too. And if they see like the Chu Mall and they know what it is, that's great, right? And maybe they can, have their own, maybe it sparks a memory for them, right? When they're going through these kinds of exhibits, or if someone doesn't know about it, or if a Hmong kid or a Hmong person sees something that is supposed to be Hmong that maybe they don't know that is Hmong, or they don't know how it sort of travels within a Hmong life cycle, that maybe they ask about it. So I think, these are the things I think about. And sometimes those audiences have faces and sometimes they don't have faces, because most times the audiences don't have faces because you don't see the audience that you curate for anyways, right? Because it's such a static kind of a medium. And it's 2D, right? But it sort of just stands still. And sometimes you're there for the opening, but that's the only time you kind of see who might be coming into your shows. And also we're in spaces that Hmong people don't really go to. So the main audience is not Hmong, right? And so then if all of these things are true, then why not tell the story you want to tell, and why not be the people that you see in your stories? And I think that's the powerful thing about Yuan I's, Kong Pityua exhibit, was that why not us, right? Which I think we did talk about, about should we be, right? And then I'm glad we decided to do this. It is a lot of work. So, don't ask me to do another exhibit for a while, but I think these are all like good questions to sort of think through and to be more comfortable, right, with being your own storyteller, I think has been the journey, at least for me. I don't care for public-facing things, so this is an interesting experience, right? But we tell so many other people's stories, and
Yes.
sometimes why not ours?
Yeah, so in thinking about audience, yeah, I think when I think about audience, like if I recall back on the different projects I've done, for Hmong Story 40, for example, you know, our audience really was the Hmong people. And the way that we worked together was to tell our story. And that was kind of, you know, how I've curated and how I want to curate. But definitely like coming to the Kohler, for example, to work on Cloth is Land. While I was doing that, I was also in my MFA design program as a graduate student, and I was focusing on textile design, but also exhibition design. And so it got me thinking a lot more about audience and, you know, the things that, like the diversity of our audience, right? Like, obviously, I want to curate from a Hmong perspective, and I want to curate for Hmong people. But then at the same time, in working with people who aren't Hmong, I realized like there's contextual information that's missing. And I was, you know, figuring out like how do I navigate that in a way that this can be for Hmong people, and it can also be for other people to engage with and understand. And so one way that we did that, you know, was that we made sure to include both Hmong and English text in Cloth is Land, and also with Cloth Origins. And, you know, and even in doing that, like, I don't always know how I feel about translating things into Hmong, because I've translated a lot of things that I don't feel have ever been used. And I feel like a lot of funding gets put into translations, and a lot of people can't read Hmong. A lot of people who can read just read English. And so then, because we had more adequate timing, really, we were able to work with our translator to also record the translations. And it's been very exciting because I know that Hua Yang from Wokma has been leading generational dialogues in the gallery. And so it's been shared with me that for the elders who come in for those workshops, they are able to listen because they can't read, and that really brings a whole new level of understanding for them in exhibition spaces, because exhibition spaces, you can just walk in and like not really understand what's happening. But for those of us who are privileged and can read, you know, we can at least get an idea, like, oh, okay, we're talking about this idea, like this is what this is saying. And so I think that element really opened up a new door for a lot of elders who can't read to really understand the concepts. And I also think just, I haven't talked much about it, but the translation process itself was just really, I think, really great because I think our translator, Carolyn Tao, who's a professor in Sacramento, she just did a wonderful job of figuring out how to translate these big concepts that we were talking about, like Hmong Indigeneity and how indigeneity lives in cloth and in textiles, and thinking about how we can say that in a way that is also as poetic as we are saying in English in Hmong. And so those are some of the ways that I was thinking about audience when I was putting together that show.
Right, so for me, when I think about audience, I think a lot about this word community and complicating this idea of community, right? And maybe this is the optimist talking, where I do really have faith in humanity that there is love, right? And that people do want to bring love, even though there's, you know, perhaps a lot of exploitation and negative things that happens in the world. But I really do believe that people do want to be together, and they perhaps just don't know how to, right? And so, you know, in complicating this notion of community, we have a lot of conversations about relationships, right? Like, oh, wanting to build relationship with people that we don't have, continuing to build relationships with people we already have, right? And so, you know, like how do we use sort of, when somebody puts you in front of a mic, like me today, what do I do with that mic that I've been given, right? Maybe I eat it. Maybe I throw it back at you guys, right? But, in terms of thinking about who is the audience, we never really always see them, like Chong said. And so how do we use sort of these very public space to sort of challenge the norm, right? What happens when we decenter the norm? And then, using, sort of these spaces to engage with a new narrative, to talk about, in spaces like the Pain Art Center or here at Kohler's, right? How do we bring in different forms and different visibility of notion of community, right? Because we talk about, in a place like Sheboygan here or the Fox Valley, there's a lot of Hmong people, but Hmong people never enter these space. And so in these little instances where we create entry points for Hmong folks to enter, like we are not just token, right? Like the people that are given the mic like me today, I'm not a token for my community. I should not have to be, right? And so how do we build these community beyond me, right? Of course, it has to start somewhere, but how do we move beyond sort of that? And so, in curating or in thinking about the kind of exhibition, the kind of experience, people come to things like this, and they get to pause and think about, oh, what does it mean for me to have a relationship with Hmong people, right? Maybe I don't have a relationship with Hmong people. Maybe I'm a Hmong kid who feels like I don't understand what is happening here. How do I rebuild that? How do I find Hmong again, right? And for folks who perhaps are not Hmong, like how do I stop and realize that, what does it mean for me to be in community with people? How do I actually get to know people? What does it mean to have a relationship, right? And really going back to complicating, all these conversations we have about community. And so, in a space like Kohler's here, when people come through and they say, oh, this is so beautiful, why is it just beautiful, right? What makes it beautiful for us is that, the relationship that we get to form with each other, right? Yesterday in my workshop, a lot of the folks talked about, building a community, building belonging, and that land is not necessarily belong to anyone, right? So how do we then reimagine the ways that, the different audience that we see or who we are when we walk through, right? As also not belong to anyone, but we belong to each other. And perhaps that really challenges sort of who gets to occupy the space or who gets to even come through. And what does it mean for when you are coming through a space and some people who are here or who are not here, right? And so sort of what you were talking about, Pachia, about whether or not we translate something, we had a lot of conversation about accessibility and what does it mean to present certain things in certain forms, right? So, I've had conversation, well, you know what, like let's just write it all in Hmong, right? Like why do we need to worry about people not understanding Hmong? How often do we actually just walk into a room and we just see Hmong things here that's just written in Hmong, right? Or that it's just a bunch of sounds, that's just Hmong sounds. Like what does that mean? What experience do we get, right? Of course, we haven't gotten there yet, but, that's the kind of chaos that I would wish for.
Yeah, I know we're near on time, and so I'm going to do a very mean thing and ask you a question that I did not send to you ahead of time and make you sort of think on the spot. And whoever answers first wins the prize. You've all said so many things that are making me think about this last thing of chaos. And Chong, you were talking about accidents, and I think that so much of what we're going to call, I guess, curation, right, is an act of storytelling, an act of creation, and opening up room for accidents, right? And also making us think about this process of displaying ourselves, right, and being like a cultural broker or a cultural bridge for these many audiences that enter these spaces. And I just kind of want to know what your ideal exhibition space would be, if it is pure chaos, no English, nothing behind glass, nothing in this actual space, right? What would it look like for you? And you have 3 minutes to answer this.
Well, I'd like to just very quickly say that when we did the exhibit in Minnesota and also here, I feel like I want to take liberty to say, unlike artists, I'm trying to tell the stories of the makers, right? And so for me, if the makers are not up with the exhibit, then it's an incomplete exhibit. And so I said this to Ga, like we took like, a lot of time hanging up all the textiles, but until we actually put the posters of the makers, it did not come alive to me, And for me, that was the proudest moment, was to put up their makers. And I know we have posters of all the makers that Red Green Rivers works with. And I'm adorning myself with all the products because Red Green Rivers was started because of the commodification of Hmong designs and the appropriation among designs, right? And so to reclaim that back, we have to work in partnership with the actual makers to make sure that if we're going to commodify anything, that we do it ourselves at our own pace, right? And we take ownership of all of that. So part of the social enterprise is to sell products that are made by these makers, but the curation and the education part is really to say that we are losing our oral traditions, right? I do not have the gift of learning right, by sitting with my grandma anymore. We have to write down things, we have to collect, we have to exhibit now, because that's the new form of transferring information and knowledge to the next generation and to the broader global community. And there is a sense of urgency for us to be the curators because we know the story the best. We know the makers better than anyone else. And I think we can tell the story more authentically than if a researcher came into a community and tried to do that. So for me, it's really, this whole process is really a process of decolonization, right, for all of us. And we can't wait for people to write their PhDs on us and reread what their interpretation is of us. I'm so mad because I used to see Hmong products sold on eBay for thousands of dollars, and Hmong people bought it, And it's like, these things we should have, and it's in our suitcases at home, but we don't take the time to actually really appreciate it. So for me, what I want to see is I want to see the 40,000 people that come to Hmong New Year in Minnesota stop and do a batik session with, Ga or our batik artists from Southeast Asia. I want the 40,000 people that come to the Fresno New Year or July 4th to really see the exhibits and to stop and do that. And a lot of that is really within our community, right? That's the power of community. But in partnership with the Kohler, right, with the other big museums that have the capacity to do that and to give us that space to do it and to give that freedom for us to do it.
So let me quickly pick up on the thread of makers and then also the idea of community and the idea of chaos. I really do love the idea of chaos because it does really, I think, put a lot of people out of their comfort zone. So my ideal exhibit and exhibit space is one that is temporary, right? So what if we had an exhibit where it's in the style, so I love the cooking shows, so Top Chef, Master Chef, Hell's Kitchen, you name it, Iron Chef. I was gonna say Iron Kitchen. So what if we did that, right? And every day, whoever comes gets to participate in a set of materials, and they get to make that exhibit for the day, and it only lasts for that day. And so if you have FOMO, you better come every day, right? And if you don't, then you missed out on that moment of making and that moment of creating and that moment of community. And maybe some days, if you're not Hmong, you get to be a spectator and you get to watch, right? Only Hmong makers, right? Make whatever the theme is for that day of materials. Maybe today's is metals. Maybe it's only bodies today, right? Maybe it's only paper, right? Maybe it's only thread, maybe it's only paint. So I feel like, if we're really going to talk about ideals, I think that would be a cool thing, right? If we're just talking about, that everybody could be a curator and everyone can be a storyteller. And if the community, right, is however we want to define it. And so, anyone know any millionaires out there? This one's going to take some resources, but I think it'll be a cool project, right?
My ideal curatorial exhibition space, that's the question. I'm very much a designer, and so I very much like iterating, and Cloth is Land kind of feels like it's this first iteration of other exhibitions that I can do. Maybe it's even the first iteration of Cloth is Land, and we can have Cloth is Land again because we're a diasporic community and we're all over the world. And so many people have been interested in it. but I like the exhibition space, and I like thinking about how to design the exhibition space. And I think, one thing that I was trying to do in Cloth is Land was to think about the aesthetic response and think about what Hmong aesthetics are. And I don't know if this exactly answers the question, but it's what's on my mind. I think I want to continue working on that because I think Hmong aesthetics is something that people don't necessarily really understand. And although we don't want to confine Hmong arts or Hmong aesthetics in any way, I'm really fascinated by the ways that patterns have continued and continue to continue in various ways, and what does that mean? And so I very much am obsessed with Ban Dao, as you can tell, and thinking about it. And that's kind of my curatorial practice, which I'm totally open to changing at some point in time. But that's kind of continuing to be my like perfect ideal exhibition space or curatorial space. And that doesn't just stay in the gallery, like it extends beyond it, because then I'm really interested in like how do you curate different types of educational experiences or just different types of experiences in general. Like, how am I curating experiences for people to learn how to make Ban Dao? How am I curating experiences for Ban Dao to travel? How am I curating experiences for people to understand or define Cloth is Land in their own ways? So those are just some of the things that I'm thinking about.
All right, so I'll try to make this brief. Aileen, when you first asked that question, I wrote down a space that continues. And what I really mean is that sort of being allowed to see that, kind of going off what you're saying, an iteration of something, and then the next time we do this again, somebody else also add a different element, right? And so this is sort of thinking about investing in experiments, right? In this world, we talk a lot about science, talk a lot about STEM, right? Like, how do we invest in these sort of experiments to create these elements of surprise? Right, and that any space that we do, right, the most ideal space is one that continues. We invest in this version of this, and the next time we get to see a different version, because there's going to continue to be more makers and creators, folks who have some vision, right? Maybe we get to experiment a different kind of vision, and we get to see what that will look like, and that experience could, really ignite a different kind of experience, right? And so, yeah, a space that continues.
Great. Thank you all. I do want to pause to say just a couple of things. One is that there is another panel that will be starting at 11. Is that right? 11:15. Sorry, I should have that info. But also that you all have given me so much to think about, right, as someone who's not a curator and mostly tries to hide behind my scholarship, right, and that you are doing these brave things of trying to have a conversation using an object, and then spending this time to come and speak to all these individuals. And so I welcome you all to approach these individuals and ask questions, and also the artists. This is a wonderful opportunity where there's lots of different types of folks gathering, right? And I've really appreciated the kinds of conversations we've been able to have across each other. And as I was thinking about this panel, I was thinking that I actually would love it if we all could just be up here and talk, right? Including all the artists and the folks from yesterday, and then the folks that will be in the panel later. So please continue to talk and to keep adding and to make new iterations of things. But I really appreciate what you've all said and what you've shared with us, and the work that you put into doing these beautiful shows and teaching us. So thank you all very much.